the United States political system is just at rock bottom right now. Because, well, he sort of gets it, right, when it comes to RFK or Cornel West. Well, he's good at this and that, so he sort of gets. Why have we just our expectations are rock bottom here? He's never been this left guy whatsoever. He was great on COVID, and a lot of us did get to know him via the COVID. And his family for a long time has been supportive of Israel.
Welcome to another episode of Twice Told Tales podcast. Today we're going to talk to Fiorella Isabel, journalist and political commentator, and the host of the Convo Couch. Fiorella, welcome to our show, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you for having me. Definitely a lot of things happening on the eastern side of the world, connecting with what's happening in the global south, in the Arab world. And there's just so much going on. So whatever you want to discuss, I'm here for.
What's the most exciting thing that you know of happening right now that's keeping you glued to the set, so to speak?
I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, there's just so many things that Russia and China are doing on the geopolitical stage right now, and so many little events that have happened as a result of this Russia-Ukraine proxy war. And really, it just shows you how it was almost like the pebble that hit the first one, but it created this gigantic ripple, because after this conflict, quote unquote, began or took itself into a new phase via the special military operation, there was just a resounding impact when it comes to the global south, meaning Africa, Latin America, as well as West Asia or the Middle East. And really the relationships that are being built right now, not just with BRICS, because BRICS is ever mounting and growing, but the relationships being built, the reparations, like the repairing of these really, really bad relationships between Pakistan and India, the relationship being rebuilt between Saudi Arabia and Iran. You have Syria and Saudi Arabia. You have other countries that have reopened their embassies in the Arab world, which is completely to me, one of the most, I think, really impactful things we need to see here towards this new multipolar world. And that's not just like a go-to buzzword. It's the reality that the nations that have been living under Western hegemony have really pushed back against this unilateral world order, and they're seeking not just cooperation, trade, equal treatment, and sovereign rights, but they're seeking this new de-dollarization. They're seeking complete economic freedom. And I don't think this multipolarity is driven by any sort of one ideology. It's not like China coming in and saying you must accept communism for us to have a relationship. It's not Russia coming in and doing whatever they have is, which is Russia is a capitalist country. It's not any of that. It's the fact that these countries are seeing the economic need. They're seeing the future. They're seeing the tide shift, and this has presented an opportunity via the sanctions against Russia, the sanctions against Syria, the sanctions against pretty much any country. In those actions, the United States has not isolated them, but pushed them together. And so what we're seeing here is a result of that in a sort of just paradigm shift type of way. Now, it's not coming easy. There's definitely a lot of things on the horizon. I know we're going to discuss Israel and Russia. And I think that is something that is going to come to a tipping point for Russia, where they're going to have to make a decision as to where they go from there. So to me, that is the most vital thing that we're seeing, is the overall shift towards a more cooperative world, where pretty much other countries are trying to have their own sovereign decision making, without the Monroe Doctrine era of the United States. And the United States is, of course, via NATO, grasping at every last bit of power that they have. And we're going to see this reflected in the elections in the United States coming up next year. We're also going to see it reflected in the fight in elections in Latin America, which I'm very knowledgeable in terms of like the political region. And we're gonna see that, of course, in the Middle East as well, as to where the issue with Israel falls.
One of the things that we're particularly in this podcast is Iran. So could you comment maybe about, have you noticed since you've been since you've moved to Moscow and been involved with political life there in terms of being a journalist, talking to people, have you felt any or noticed how people view Iran or sanctions against Iran and sanctions against Russia? Do they view Iran and Russia as both victims of the same power? Do they view them as like a brother in this fight? Or how do they view Iran? Is it viewed as like a terrorist state? Because here in America, everyone just says mullah whenever you say Iran, because they're like programmed with some kind of like response. They don't understand the situation. They've just been programmed to think that it's evil mullahs, and it's hard to have geopolitical understanding. So I'm curious what that is like in Russia, that discourse.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Like, it really, if you're talking about it at the diplomatic level, at the political level, Iran is a extremely powerful ally of Russia and vice versa. There's that relationship that has been built now for decades in terms of just not just military, but economic, cultural. There's that support, as you mentioned, of being targeted by the West. There is a very good relationship that has been established. It's an important one for Russia. Iran is another nuclear power. It is a power that is in the Middle Eastern region. However, at the same time, Russia has a relationship with Israel. They've had one for a long time, and there are more pro-Israel factions and anti-Israel factions within the Russian government. So it's a fought-out situation. However, I would say that the people who have a resounding emotional response to the reasons they're fighting in the Donbass, the people outside of Moscow, the people that are have largely been affected by the thousands of deaths at the hands of these neo-Nazi factions in Ukraine, those people have a affinity with Palestine and with what's happening with the Palestinian people, with what's happened with the Syrian people. And in a different context, there's also the idea that Israel is part of this older global world order that is trying to basically cement itself as the global unipolar leadership of the entire world. And they see Israel as part of that because Israel is the United States' largest ally in the Middle East when we're talking about military might, when we're talking about political influence. So there is a division, but it's definitely not, I wouldn't say it's the number one concern in terms of what is going on with Israel-Palestine right now. I wouldn't say it's a number one concern because right now the concern is to maintain neutrality. And from that perspective, Russia has taken upon itself to criticize Israel, but also continue, as we just saw, building some sort of relationship as a way to maintain some sort of peace. However, like I said, Russia will eventually have to decide who of its allies is more important, and I think it would be a very wrong decision to not make that decision away from Israel, because Israel is, I would consider it the younger sibling of the United States military-industrial complex. It is essentially, when we talk about British intelligence, Israeli intelligence, and U.S. intelligence, they are all the ones right now working together. So it would just be a really terrible decision, and it would really not help the Russian population and the Russian government as a whole in this critical moment that they're, facing all the Western world's stigmatization of being evil, of being terrible, of going around and killing Ukrainians, to not have those allies in the Arab world. So it's definitely an important concept, but I do think that as far as the specifics as to Iran and Palestine, I think right now Russia is more so focused on neutrality and on maintaining these relationships for as long as they can. And I don't think, though, that Russia is just going to throw Iran under the bus. I don't think we're going to see that. But it is definitely a very sticky situation, because there is that relationship with Israel that has existed for a long time.
But Iran and Palestine have never funded the enemies of Russia, and Israel has. So like in 2019 and 2020, or 2020, I think, it was reported in mainstream media, but Gray Zone did a couple articles on Israel directly funding Azov in Ukraine. So like,
yeah.
To rehash recent history, it seems like there's an obvious enemy collaborator and funder of the enemy there that needs to be really questioned.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I'll shut up now. Satara, you take it away.
Yeah, I was going to say it's very surprising for me, because Israel is a part of the conflict in Ukraine, but as you said, like, Iran has never been a part of the conflicts that Russia has been involved in, and it's definitely very. I find it harmful that, for example, yeah, we know that Russia has relations with Israel, and it's been going on for a very long time. But their recent move to open a branch of their embassy in Jerusalem, which is, I'm sure a lot of people in Iran and in a lot of other countries, anyone who is a supporter of Palestine, find it really shocking. And they are wondering why this has to come at a time when you're seeing a reunion of all the states inside West Asia, and like reconciliation between Syria, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman, and all these countries are getting united, and you see reconciliation between, for example, Syria and certain branches of the resistance forces in Palestine, and all of a sudden you see Russia opening a branch of its embassy. So it's very it's kind of surprising, and I'm thinking, like, what does that mean? And like you said, I'm sure Russia doesn't want to kind of harm its alliance with Iran, with other countries in the region, but it's also puzzling. So why should this happen particularly at this time, and particularly after Israel has escalated its aggression against Palestinians in Gaza, in West Bank, other places? So
yeah,
so what do you think about? How far is this going to go on? Is this just one of a move out of all the other attempts by Russia to strengthen its alliance with other countries, or do you see this as probably a continuation of other things, or what is it going to happen next?
I think Russians are very pragmatic and diplomatic, almost to a fault, in terms of the political, especially when we talk about the foreign policy that they push out. And I don't think they see this as a betrayal to Iran or Palestine in a way that others see it, because they see it as just opening an embassy in this region, which is very well disputed. But it's almost like they see it as a necessity to sort of show Israel that they're willing to still talk to them because of their latest ties with Iran. Because as you mentioned, Iran, what's been going on between Iran and Israel Palestine, and Israel and Syria, it has escalated, and the crimes Israel has committed against these people has escalated. And I think this is a way to sort of say, okay, we're still going to continue building up our military with Iran, but at the same time, we're also going to keep an eye on Israel. And I think that's the way. They're not looking at it as a betrayal, as more of like, okay, we're gonna do this, and hopefully you won't continue to supply weapons to Ukraine. But I don't agree with this move. I think it was the wrong move. I don't think they really get anything out of this whatsoever, except creating doubts in the Arab world as to where Russia will stand, and especially because the Arab world, and when I talk about that, I'm talking about Iran, Syria, the people of Palestine, and other regions have stood with Russia against the West. So it symbolically, in many ways, really just issues the wrong idea, where Russia right now doesn't need that. So I do agree that it was the wrong move. But that, I mean, we don't know for sure what they were thinking, but I can guess it was just a very pragmatic, like, let's move, put this embassy here, and let's see if we can continue to maintain some sort of hold on Israel to show them that they don't want to mess with the region, almost in a way as putting themselves is a lodge between the ever-growing conflict. But as I said before, I think Russia's going to have to choose. There's only so much neutrality you can have when there is an apartheid, Zionist imperialist power trying to spread itself across the region. And you can't simultaneously talk about fascists and neo-Nazis going after people in Donbass and then ignore the Zionists and supplying weapons, I guess, via the United States, but their weapons as well to kill the people of Donbass. It just doesn't fit. It's very hypocritical. So I do think that,
by the way, direct from Israel to Ukraine. Like, they have
yeah,
pictures of, like, meeting together, and it's just like, because the article was like, what are Jews doing? What's Israel doing supporting Nazis? And it's just like, that was the shock.
well, that's a whole other conversation,
Yeah,
right?
but I mean,
that we can get into.
it's,
Yeah,
it's so obvious that it's like, for Russia, it should be painful to have to support Israel, because there's
I don't think they see it as supporting Israel as much as they see it as maintaining, like what they say is maintaining peace in the region. And that has been their stance for a while. And they see this as something that's just, okay, this is just a political, we're just going to open this embassy here. It's going to be okay. But I don't think they really, and this is common, that I don't think they perceive the public reaction to this and the reaction that it would have. They're just doing what they think. And this is, again, goes to speak to the way they just don't know how to do, like, they get accused so much of doing propaganda and of manipulating things, but really Russians don't do that. I just, after living there and just seeing how they operate, especially when it comes to the public relations imagery, they just don't really do that. They just make these decisions based a lot on under what I would say the policy is of the UN. They really are, to a fault, have been so diplomatic on this whole situation, even as far as the Russia-Ukraine issue itself. In trying to negotiate and trying to be diplomatic, people have already responded that they didn't like that they stuck to the grain deal, because Ukraine hasn't been sticking to the grain deal. So when Russia does these things, I think there's definitely a visceral emotional reaction to it, and people are going to have that, but they just don't look at things that way. And it was really frustrating for a lot of us that are extremely so pro-Palestinian, or supporters of the freedom of the Palestinian people, supporters of the freedom of the Arab world from Israel and Western hegemony, to see that. And I do think, like, in analyzing that move, it was definitely more of Russia just signaling to Israel that they're going to have a conversation, perhaps wanting them to stop their involvement of weapons to Ukraine. But I don't think it's going to happen. And I do think this is a fault where there's too much of a naivety in this sort of reliance with this relationship, and I just don't think it's going to work. I do think that there are influences in Russia that are definitely, just like there are everywhere else, pro-Zionist, and they also have a role in this as well.
Okay.
Talking about pro-Zionism.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were you going to
I
get
wanted,
into RFK Jr. really quick?
yes.
Okay, wait. Before we do that, I just want one personal question. I just want to ask how I'm very impressed by your ability to understand Zionism, and it's actually a very difficult thing for people to get as Americans growing up in America to understand that. Have you ever traveled to Palestine?
No, actually, I'm looking to travel there very soon.
Okay.
I have lots of friends, and it's one of the causes that I will not budge on. And yeah. So
my question is, how did you get to that firm understanding of reality? Because like what happened in your life that got you to understand that position? Because it like I said, even for a lot of even the alternative media people still like think that Israel sort of good in what they're doing, and I've just it's impressive because I lived there for almost 2 years, so like I've seen the injustice and how it's reported in the media as complete lies. But if I just consumed American narratives, it would be very difficult to truly get as firm of a belief as you have. So
I just think it's having Palestinian friends, but also to me, it's the same fight in terms of what you see being done to Palestinians as has been done to other peoples of the world, particularly in Latin America and in Africa. And it's the same type of fight, but also this idea that being against Zionism means you're against Jewish people is a manipulation. It's a political manipulation. And you just have to go back to who began the state of Israel, who started the state of Israel, and the people behind that. Simply the weaponization of the Jewish identity has just been this really veil used to avoid any sort of criticism. And there are a lot of people from the Jewish community that are against Zionism. And that's an important thing to highlight. It is not the same thing. They're not even the same people. When we talk about Nazism, or let's talk about fascism, when we talk about ideologies of white supremacy, whatever that is, whether it's, a KKK member or whether it's the neo-Nazis, paramilitary fascists in Ukraine, and you look at Zionism, anybody that says we are the chosen people that are superior above to everybody else, and these people need to die. I don't care what religion you call yourself, you are a fascist. So to me, it's no different than the neo-Nazis who are killing, ethnically Russian-speaking or Slavic people because they think themselves superior. And the veil of Hebrewism, of the religion of Judaism, or the identity as well, has been used to cover that sort of humanitarian disaster that is Palestine. It's just complete. There's no denying it, and anybody that's ever been there says that. And if you've watched countless documentaries that have been done on Palestine, you know that. So it would just be hypocritical, I think, to look at the lens as the people who are oppressed and the people of the world fighting against the imperialist powers, and not include Palestine on that. And I recently did an interview with I've done several with pro-Palestinian people, but with the grandson of Nelson Mandela, and he is an ardent supporter of Palestine as an apartheid state. That Israel is an apartheid state, and the Palestinian people are being, killed in mass and in this gigantic open-air prison. And so, really, if you do consider yourself any sort of anti-imperialist, any justification of Zionism really just shows you're willing to have that American exceptionalism, which is how I feel about those supporting Robert F. Kennedy, that they're willing to say, well, but he's good on all of these other issues, so we're just gonna, he's not good on Israel-Palestine, so we're just gonna have to. And I just see, okay, that's fine that you can do that, but that is American exceptionalism, and you're willing to do that, and then this is why nothing changes. So yeah.
Right. Well,
And
also
it's that.
just to add on to what you were just saying about the fascist nature of it, it's no surprise that the Zionist lobby is the same group that gave us the war on terror, which then turned Islam into this umbrella, just like Judaism is exploited to allow for the violence of colonialism of Palestine. Islam was exploited to provide for the terror that America and its allies, including Israel, was able to exert on the world in terms of the occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan and the destruction even of Libya. The use of this narrative that there's an evil group that needs to be, and then all of Islam basically is being exploited by that. And ISIS did not represent Islam. It's the same way that Israel's hopefully doesn't represent Judaism. So I just want to get that out there. So but let's turn to RFK Jr. Like RFK Jr., I like him, and you and I and Satara, all of us see eye to eye on COVID and its insanity. And RFK Jr. was one of the guys who was like open to go against big pharma. So he was just a relief valve and like a real therapeutic person to listen to and read his books, because he's so scientifically based, and he has no problem fighting those demons. But when it comes to the Zionist lobby, I didn't know he was that bad on it, and I thought I sort of had maybe implanted memories in my head that I'd heard something that made me think that he was actually realistic on that issue. But now I don't even know what he was before. What he was like before this, whether he genuinely supported Roger Waters' stance on Palestine, I don't know. What do you think? Do you think this is a recent transformation, or do you think it's something that he basically has been terrible about the whole time?
Well, no, I think he has been terrible the whole time. I haven't seen any evidence of him being pro-Palestinian. He's definitely been very much anti-social, socialist. Like he's definitely said many things against, socialism in favor of capitalism. So he's always been on that route. He's never been this left guy whatsoever. He was great on COVID, and a lot of us did get to know him via the COVID. I guess the COVID reveal that many Americans, of course, fell to because they were being propagandized and fear mongered into believing. But he never, outside of that, really struck me as somebody that was politically savvy. Even when it comes to Russia, Ukraine, he does talk about the U.S. and NATO's involvement. He talks about their culpability, and he mentioned Victoria Nuland and what happened, but he certainly definitely got that from others. And he certainly did his homework before he spoke out against that. His family has been involved and I think it was his son that was involved, and he was extremely pro-Ukrainian, and he was congratulating his son on that whole scenario. So it's just, to me, it's just, I never thought he was anybody that was foreign policy wise savvy. And his family for a long time has been supportive of Israel. This is nothing new, in spite of the fact that, of course, we know that Israel was involved in the slaying of his family. Exactly. So it's a lot. My issue is with a lot of Americans and a lot of Westerners. They say, well, this is the way it is. You have to, you're threatened. You have to say you're going to swear your fealty to Israel, to AIPAC in some sort of fashion. And this is just the way it is in the United States. If you're not willing to break that barrier, then you shouldn't be running for president. And further, then what is the difference then between you and Joe Biden and Donald Trump when it comes to Israel? And then if you're already from the start bending over backwards to appease the powers that be, because they are, in fact, some of the strongest, if not among the top strongest powers that be, then what does that say about the rest of your foreign policy, and how will that suffer in terms of that if you're already doing this from the onslaught? And I just don't see how people can justify that, except for the fact that we have been through the ringer in the United States. We've had, the disillusionment of Bernie Sanders. We've had in 2016 and how he just didn't fight back. We had 2020 from the beginning. His campaign was just infested with Center for American Progress stooges and the Democratic establishment. We've had the Trump versus Biden scenario, the fear mongering via Trump, and then of course we've had all of this just constant just tension between Russia in the United States and Russia and China in the United States, which is ramping up right now. And people in the United States are suffering economically, very much so. So when you look at that and you look at the psyche of the United States and what we've created from the moment we've been propagandized as children to believe in this Marvel world where there's this hero and a villain, Kennedy came in looking promising, looking like somebody that was going to challenge the establishment. One of the reasons Donald Trump was so popular is because he posed himself as an outsider that was going to, quote unquote, drain the swamp and all of that. So people are looking for that on the Democratic end as well. And Kennedy seemed like a viable option. And so when you put all these red flags about Kennedy out to a lot of people that have really just tied their emotions and their support to somebody that could at least maybe change things in the United States, and then you tie the Kennedy name to that, the legacy that came with the murder of JFK and Robert Kennedy, you really have this character, I think, that a lot of people have created in their minds that he is some sort of savior. And we do that all the time. We did it with Bernie Sanders, we've done it with Donald Trump, and we did it with Obama. And the reality is the United States will not be saved through electoral politics. It is beyond electoral politics at this point, because these candidates do not get to have a say. The United States foreign policy is controlled by the intelligence apparatus and the military industrial complex, while the domestic policies are controlled by the corporate world. And so you don't have this democracy. You have an illusion of democracy. And every 4 years, the American public pretends that they do have a say in this. And then they go and vote, and then they see what happens. And then they say, oh, I'm never voting again, or I'm never voting Democrat again. And then they forget about it, and they're like, well, maybe this time we'll do it again. It's Charlie Brown kicking the football that Lucy puts in front of him every single time, and it just happens over and over.
But the important additional thing they do after they vote is they blame their neighbor for the failure, because they say, no, it's because you didn't vote this way. We had the That's what they do, and that's the whole shtick. Is you get the people on the top get people to like blame each other for the failures that they're, and it's actually brilliant. And we're not the first people to notice that. I mean, de Tocqueville, I think in like the 1600s, coming over from France, he was like studying democracy, and he wrote this whole book on democracy, and that's his whole point. Is like it doesn't work. It's a failed system because eventually they'll figure out how to hijack it, and then the elites can just step back. And it's worse than having a king, because with a king, at least you can chop off the head. But in a democracy, the people will be convinced it's their own fault rather than the fault of the corrupt leaders. So. That's where we are. But you want to? I guess we want to talk about Cornel West. You want to talk about that, Satara? Get that started.
Yeah, I think you recently talked to Cornel West. Is that correct, Fiorella?
No. So, well, what? I've been traveling like endlessly for the last like week and a half. So my co-host Craig asked Cornel West some of the questions I sent him, and he asked him some of his questions. Cornel West, I've interviewed before as well, during the last Bernie Sanders run in 2020. He is a figure that I've always liked, in terms of where he stood on left politics, on where he stood on the fight of oppressed people. He's really good on Palestine, as far as I know, but he is also, I think, in many ways stuck with the old, more, I would say, Western type of left, where we really don't talk enough about foreign policy, right? We focus so much on domestics, on Medicare for all, on this so-called Green New Deal that they've been pushing, which is completely just corporatized BS at this point. and on, on domestic policies of getting a living wage and all of that. But what the Western left doesn't realize is a lot of these policies are directly impacted by our foreign policy. Our foreign policy is our domestic policy. It's the same thing. It's just catered to in a different way and to a different audience. And most of the left in the United States does not care about foreign policy. They only care about these domestic issues, which is understandable given the economic situations we're in. However, what we export to the world is literally chaos, destruction, regime changes, coups, and that, of course, in turn comes back to haunt us via the just incessant military spending. We don't make anything anymore except weapons, and we export these weapons, and that's it. We don't have anything that we create for ourselves in the United States, whereas other countries do. And you can look at China as the number one example of what that is. And so when you have the left like this, you just have a very fractured left, or whatever's left of that. Then you have independents, you have Republicans, and then you have like the populists, what is called now the populist right, that is generally more anti-war than some people on the liberal left, which is insane. But also they pick and choose as to what issues they're going to be anti-war on. You give any of these Republicans that have been against the war in Ukraine, you switch Ukraine to Taiwan, and they will jump on that like crazy, because that's the team mentality here of it's okay to not wage a war against Russia, but communist China that's trying to take over, we're totally going to do that. So it's the United States political system is just at rock bottom right now, because no candidate really fulfills that necessity to really take on foreign policy and really talk about the reality of how that is affecting the American public and the domestic situation. And Cornel West really failed when he answered the questions on COVID. He really had no idea, and he admitted he was willing to learn, but he really had no idea. He called Putin a criminal and a thug, and it's not even about the emotional reaction that I have to somebody calling Putin like a thug. It's the fact that it shows that there's a lack of understanding on this geopolitical issue that is impacting the entire world, as the proxy war of the United States and NATO against Russia, and how that started and how we got here in the first place. And I do think that it just discredits somebody that could be somebody strong enough to take on the powers that be when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to understanding the stage. Because if you don't understand that, if I understand that, if you understand that, if other people watching this program understand that, I expect our president, somebody running to be president, to not just understand that, but understand it at a greater depth. But instead, what we have in the United States is this idea that, well, I mean, even though we understand it, well, he sort of gets it, right? When it comes to RFK or Cornel West, well, he's good at this and that, so he sort of gets. Why have we just our expectations are rock bottom here? Because we are just running out of options, and we've just allowed ourselves to just really put people in power, or even contemplate the idea of putting people in positions of a lot of power, or even if it's symbolic power, by people who really don't know a whole lot. And I do think that this, again, it's this idea of somebody saving us, whether it's Cornel for the left, or whether it's RFK for the independent-minded, whatever contingent of the United States, or whether it's Donald Trump. And it's just, that's not how it works. It's just not going to, none of these people, even if they were the perfect candidate, are going to undo what has been done. And I do think the only solution is for the United States to fall as an empire, because the American public has never had to endure what other people in other countries have endured. I was just in Venezuela, and I spoke against the lawfare being imposed on the diplomat Alex Saab, who is a Venezuelan diplomat his crime is trying to get medicine and food to the people of Venezuela under sanctions, and Iran was the ships that were delivering these goods, and the United States offered millions of dollars to each of these the ones that were conducting the ships, the different ships, and they said no. And this is why that one of the reasons why Venezuela and Iran have such a close relationship, because it's these sanctions and this just the vilifying of these leaders that has pretty much pushed them together. And so Alex Saab was detained twice, first by President Trump and then by President Joe Biden, showing you that it doesn't matter who is president. They have the same foreign policy towards countries like Venezuela. And he's a diplomat. It is against international law to detain a diplomat. We just saw, again, another instance in, was it Poland, with the South African delegation being detained. And one of the diplomats, who was a female, was frisked, and she was completely just interrogated in a way that was contrary to what international law says a diplomat should be. And they weren't allowed. They were sent back. And this is the reality that we have here, where, you know, people just don't look at this in the United States right now. They're so focused on trying to survive. And so you have any candidate that's saying, okay, we're gonna get you more jobs, we're gonna get you this and that, and people just cling on to that. And the majority of people who aren't, you know, who are normies, right? They're not like watching this show, they're not like politically knowledgeable about a lot of stuff. And in order for the normies to really get into this, they're going to have to feel it in their pockets. They're going to have to literally, and COVID wasn't enough. Clearly, COVID wasn't enough. And it's going to have to take something worse than COVID, worse than the fallout of COVID. And it's unfortunate because it's not something I necessarily wish for my family and friends in the United States. It's not something that I want, but I do think that until it gets to that point, the American public's just going to be fighting about trans issues, or fighting about issues that are, you know, the highly hot button issues that get people to fight, and literally it affects like such a small contingent of the population on either end of
issues. They keep generating them as a way of kicking the can down the road for the actual revolution, right?
Right. Yeah, but there's not going to be a revolution because the American public is not ready for that. In order for there to be revolutions, an actual like revolt and an actual attempt to get control for the people of the United States, to get control of the government, there has to be a desire. And there's not a desire because people are still comfortable. People are still, you know, going home and watching TV shows. They're still trying to pretend that everything is okay, but the house is on fire. And at some point, it's going to fall down and collapse, and it's going to burn you. So I think we're getting closer and closer in the United States to that point, but I don't think we're there yet. And unfortunately, you know, that I don't see a solution via the electoral realm. I've tried it. If you asked me this a few years ago, I would have said, yeah, we can try a third parties, which Cornel West is running as a green under, which I think is actually a decent thing to do. I think anybody that says they're challenging the establishment by running as a Democrat is not serious. But again, how much attention is he going to get? How much visibility is he going to get? How much is he going to be allowed to do? Not much. And so you have this whole kind of conundrum where people are just like, well, maybe I just should support the Democrat because he has a bigger chance. Well, maybe we should build something, you know, but we don't, because we're so afraid of, we don't know what to do outside of voting. And voting is just not going to do it this time.
Yeah, like he said, it's talking to, I mean, people in America, or just following the discussions around at the election in America online. It's that what I see is that people, or a lot of people, have a very low bar on who's right and who's wrong, and like hoping for a change in the political system. And I'm not a U.S. citizen, so I've never even been to the U.S., and I should be the last one to have an opinion on that. But because U.S. policies affect other countries, especially Iran's, in many different ways. I mean, it's something that I follow, and I really hope to see some kind of change. And there are things that you might want to an extent, kind of, you know, like just overlook and ignore and say, okay, maybe this is not important. For example, I would say with COVID, I personally don't think or don't know any government, any country in the world that did not go by the WHO playbook. And even Iran and Cuba went for the same rules and vaccinations and everything. But and that's something that I could kind of feel that, okay, I understand if people don't understand it. But when it comes to everything else, it's I mean, it's just the least that you can expect that people understand, for example, Palestine and the case of Syria and also Iran. Like talking about Cornel West, because I did my PhD on Nation of Islam, and I was pretty much into African American studies, and I really wanted to study. And I always looked up to him as a scholar in African American studies, and really liked his work and everything. When I saw his statement on Iran protests back in in October, like October last year, I was really like disappointed on how he's totally brainwashed on Iran, and part of it is because of his Iranian American wife, who I don't know when was the last time that he lived in Iran. I mean, she lived in Iran. One of the Iranian expats that are so detached from the realities on the ground and have no idea what the people inside Iran actually want and follow. But it's like you said, I mean, it's very disappointing, and I mean, if the same thing happened inside Iran, I would at least not want to take part in the election to send the message that no, I'm not. I mean, I'm not going to lower my standards. I'm going to expect more from the establishment, or to see changes within the establishment. But it looks like at this point it's still a lot to expect from just any governments.
Yeah. Well, Iran is in particular, and this is how they get the Western left. And I say Western left because even though I am an American and I consider myself, pretty far left, I don't ascribe to this type of foreign policy that a lot of these people who call themselves, they call themselves Marxists. I don't believe they are, but this is what they call themselves. And they think they are so they're so far ahead of everybody else, because when you talk about Iran, you talk about human rights violations. Iran and the human rights violations, and the violations against women, the violations against their freedom for women, and you've seen the youth manipulated in Iran to create this idea that the people of Iran cannot create their own decisions, make their own decisions, and have this sovereignty. So you see that being manipulated, of course, through the protests that were happening over the hijab and over this and that. And it was a bunch of things that were tied to human rights violations and wanting the freedom of the people of Iran. So that's how they sell it to the Western left, and the intelligence apparatus knows exactly what they're doing. They target the youth, and not just in the United States. They target the youth, as I mentioned, in Iran. They target the youth in Venezuela. They target the youth in Cuba, and the youth in Russia. Any other movement that we have seen in the world that has been led by some sort of oppositionary figure, whether it was Juan Guaido in Venezuela or Alexei Navalny in Russia, has targeted the youth, and they do this by turning them against the government. Putin is against anti-LGBT, or he's anti-LGBT. So therefore, he is this fascist, and you want freedom for the Russian people and the Ukrainian people. Look, the Ukrainian people are a tiny country. They need freedom from the evil Russian imperialists. So then you have these Western leftists talking about Russian imperialists. And then, at the same time, they're saying, yeah, and the blockade in Cuba. But also we're going to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And so it's like this hodgepodge of just complete and total lack of understanding of the realities of U.S. interventionism, of U.S. intelligence. This is totally the intelligence apparatus at work here. This is why they've been promoting inclusivity and equality in the CIA, and they did all those countless videos of, you know, hi, I'm a woman and I'm gay and I'm in the CIA and it's great, and like, oh, I'm this person, I'm this identity, because what they know that that's a weakness of the progressive contingent in the United States, where they try to have this sort of white savior complex, where they come in and say, oh, we want inclusivity, we want to allow all these different people in. So they just manipulate the entire identity aspect and they propagandize it. So there comes support to the establishment, and there is a complete and total stoppage of any actual revolt. And Lenin has spoken about this. I mean, this is just type of reformist behavior that we're seeing here. And the squad, right? AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and all of these politicians are a complete and total display of that. They are, and in some instances, they'll speak out against X issue and they'll do that, but then they'll revert back to the establishment. And I just call that intersectional imperialism, because at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter if you're a woman, if you're transgender, if you're gay or a person of color, if you're espousing the same type of foreign policy as the oppressors, as the predator class, as we like to call them. And it's really sad how these identities have been manipulated to push this disastrous foreign policy. And this is why they can't talk about the disastrous foreign policy abroad, because you can talk about, the killing of Black children in the United States and get applause, but you can't talk about that when it comes to Libya, when it comes to what's happening all over the Eastern and the global South, because it's just not important, and it just doesn't fit into this American exceptionalist view of the sort quasi-leftism that exists in the West.
Well, the power of those narratives is interesting. I met Craig at the Rage Against the War Machine rally, and we were both very enthusiastic about that event. And Code Pink boycotted that event because they said Jackson Hinkle is an LGBTQ denier or something like that, and which is absurd. And then just last week, Code Pink is like in the LGBTQ parade, protesting hand in hand with Lockheed Martin and Boeing and the Department of Homeland Security, who all had their little gay flags or whatever. And it's like, that's how easy it is. You can just literally pull the brain out of and create these zombies just when you just fly a rainbow flag. That's all it takes, is like, that's the neuro-linguistic programming. You can just like wave a rainbow flag and all of a sudden like the hypnosis kicks in and they start acting like a duck on stage or whatever. I mean, it's pretty amazing how that programming has worked, because I mean, if we want to assume that Code Pink is genuine, which I'm not quite sure about. Actually, I'm pretty sure they're not. But and that's the organization that I went to Iran with, and how I met Satara. So I actually have a lot of inside knowledge of that group, and at this point, I really do think that they are psyop, meant to like create a gate and the end of protests. Like, they're the ones who stop, because they're the ones who like lead the charge, that get into the events, and they're like, and then they were terrible in Iran. They basically were like backing the whole Iranian narrative in the protests last year. They were saying like, oh yeah, we have to save the women, no violence, but we have to save the women. And they did the same thing in Syria. They were like, oh yeah, Bashar Assad's terrible, but no violence. So they basically like promote the narrative, but then they say, oh, but we're not for violence. So they like legitimize the imperialist narrative.
Goal, but
yeah. And so anyway, all I'm saying is like that LGBTQ thing is an amazing tool for imperialism. So we have to be very careful of that, and how we communicate that, because it can make or break people. And I don't know how to navigate that minefield, but
it's just a mess right now, because I've attended those pride parades years ago, and it's not like those pride parades are organized by Lockheed Martin, Boeing. It's not. It's just a bunch. What it is, it's a bunch of companies go and they sign up that they're going to participate in Pride, and all the employees go, and all of that. So that's what it is. There's a lot of nuance to these discussions, because like, it's not like these people were literally knowingly supporting Lockheed Martin. A lot of people that I went to college and in high school with, one of the best companies they were told to work for was Lockheed Martin, Boeing. There were some others as engineers, or as people that, if you wanted a good job out of college and you wanted to be successful, that's where you were told to go in college. So a lot of these people didn't even have an idea what Lockheed Martin was. And then they went into it and they're like, oh, we make weapons. Okay. So a lot of these people work for Lockheed Martin. And so that Pride Parade was like a hodgepodge of people who work for certain companies. And then they had, Lockheed Martin there. The hypocrisy comes in when you're criticizing people for attending the Rage Against the War Machine or speaking at the Rage Against the War Machine, because there are people you don't like at the Rage Against the War Machine. There was a lot of people that I didn't like at the Rage Against the War Machine. And there was a lot of people that I didn't like at the other rally. And I told people to go to both rallies, because at the end of the day, when you're talking about stopping NATO and stopping nuclear war, that should be what is most important for you to do. And this is my issue with politics in the United States, is that you had a bunch of people in the Rage Against the War Machine even going after each other because of one speaker, in particular, Scott Ritter, who was kicked off. He shouldn't have been kicked off, but it was just this whole thing where he's pro-Russia, because you had a lot of not, anti-Russia people there too. So it just became this really just ridiculousness of people, calling everybody a fascist who was attending the Rage Against the War Machine, and other people saying, trying to say, okay, well, we won't invite this person and we won't invite that person. And then there was another parade that was created, which Code Pink did attend as well. I do think one of the Code Pink members did attend Rage Against the War Machine as well. But I think Code Pink is a psyop at this point? I don't know. I think it didn't start off as that, but their takes on Russia, Ukraine, on Syria, on all of these issues, Iran, as you mentioned, has been really, really just a milquetoast establishment. Like I just mentioned, the left, we have to save the women, save, their freedom. It's just the same type of actual policy that is supported by the State Department. So the hypocrisy comes in as to when you pick and choose when you're going to support, the State Department talking points. And I think we have to be careful as to how these narratives are being used to divide us. But also, they're not everybody that's gay is going to be some sort of the right thinks everybody who's gay is some sort of pedophile. The left thinks that it's the number one issue. It's neither of those things, and there's no nuance to these discussions. And really, we know that these identities are being propagandized, they're being weaponized to divide us, and we really have to be smarter than allowing ourselves to be weaponized by either side of the political spectrum for these distractions, and really focus on economics, which is something I see the left in Latin America do all the time, because they have no choice, which is something I see the people of the Arab world do all the time, because they have no choice. They have no choice. They've been living under sanctions. They've been living under bombs. And when you are living in those conditions, like the people in the Donbass were living for 9 years, you have no choice. When you're in Donbass and you're hearing bombs every time you're there, and you're thinking that any given moment they could fall somewhere near you, your priorities change. And that's why I keep going back to the US's priorities have to change in order for them to change, because right now it's not.
Well, I think economics is really important, because that's the thing they shy away from here in the US, anything to do with coalition building among the poor. I mean, that's why arguably Martin Luther King was assassinated, because he was trying to get even the white racists to join with the black everyone who's poor together and have them revolt. And so instead we get these stupid politically correct things that divide us. And I think that hypocrisy you were talking about is also should be looked at on the smaller scale, where it's ESG, this coming ESG is a branding of that kind of hypocrisy. It's a branding of that divisiveness without looking at real crime. So you can have Lockheed Martin saying, oh, look, we have great ESG ratings. Oh, we're so proud. We have gay people working for us. They're so happy here. And then the whole product, the whole purpose of the company is to go bomb poor people around the world to support empire. That's the whole, is to create a terrorist, create a beast of terror that people are afraid of, because they're creating these high-tech bombs that can kill people anywhere around the world. So it's like, are you kidding me? Like ESG, you're even going to say the word ESG or even say the word like pride when you work for a company that's that horrible and brutal in reality of what the product you're producing is? I mean, that's pretty awful. But that ESG thing is being used. It's turning into this weapon that corporations that do horrible things can then say, no, we're not so horrible. Look, we got a ESG score that's better than whatever, you know. So that hypocrisy, I think, is important to look at in many ways. So I think it's good that we talked about that. And unless, do you have anything you want to share, like what you're working on now, or like ways for people to connect with you, or things you want people to know that we haven't talked about?
Yeah, so I've just been trying to break a new channel as well. Just basically, it's going to focus on a lot of the same politics, but from the perspective of being in Russia and a lot of that. So that should be coming out soon. It's just I've been so busy traveling, and even when I'm on vacation, I'm not on vacation. So there's that aspect. And we still do the Convo Couch. I'll be back tomorrow, giving a wrap up of what I did in Venezuela, and just some of the latest things that have happened geopolitically. And then yeah, we're going to be doing our regular shows, and then I will be back on RT soon as well, doing the news there. So lots of things happening, lots of traveling, but I'm very thankful to do, you know, this work. It's good, it's fulfilling, and there's just so much of it. So thank you for having me on.
Oh yeah,
Appreciate
no problem. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for
What's the name of your new show so we can talk about
it was just going to be a channel under my name, so I'll
Okay,
probably
great.
publicize it on Twitter. Yeah.
Well, we're happy to help
Great.
support you in that if you want to talk about Iran or propaganda or anything like that. So we'll be happy to
course.
collab. So
Of course. Sounds
all right.
good.
Thanks everyone for joining us on another episode of Twice Told Tales podcast, and big thanks to Fiorella for bringing us all the new insight into geopolitics. And we'll catch you guys around next time.